Eve, like
Eve.
E with an N.
Perfect. And your pronouns are they, them, correct? Or, okay, cool. I'm Cree.
Nice to meet you, Cree.
Good to meet
Ines,
you.
nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Ines.
Cool, sweet. So I guess we'll just, yeah, I have like some things written out that I'd love to ask you and get to know more, but obviously we'd love for it to just be as organic of a conversation as possible. So I'm not too concerned. Just talk about whatever.
Cool.
Yeah, so let's just jump in with just a little bit about your background, about yourself. I know there's a lot of really cool, like you talk about cumbia music and stuff like that. So I'd love to know kind of how maybe just where you lived or your actual roots and family kind of came into play in molding you. And then additionally, where you live now and how that artistic community helps kind of shape what you do.
Totally. So I grew up in Denver, lived there my whole childhood, and I currently live in New Orleans, but I have also spent time living in like the Pacific Northwest and in Mexico as well. So, and I don't have any like, I'm not sure where the cumbia thing comes from. I'm not positive about where you got that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought there was something in one of your comic strips about cumbia music.
Oh,
I might be mistaken.
yeah. There is, but just yeah, that's just a little thing about listening to cumbia on the radio.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, but yeah, I am a non-binary queer artist. That is, and I also like identify as being a neurodivergent person on the spectrum, and those are things that really like influence my perspective and my art. And yeah, like I actually just moved to New Orleans at the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh gosh.
It's been like a really interesting time to move to a new place. Like I arrived here in January 2020 and got like 2 months of like normal life before everything changed. But it's been a really interesting time to be in a new environment and like in a new community, because like as much as it's kind of like a hard time to get to know people and get to know the community, like at the same time I feel like in New Orleans I'm really learning there's like such an amazing network of artists and like activists and community organizations, and especially with everything that happened over the summer with all the uprisings and everybody trying to take care of each other through this crazy fucking time. Like,
yeah,
it's been like a really interesting time to come into the community. And yeah,
that's awesome. I love New Orleans. I didn't get to, it was always on my bucket list, and then I finally got to go a few years back, and there's just the vibration, like an energy there that feels really good and just really connected, and there's such a history there as well. Yeah, and that must tie really well to an extent into kind of the themes that you explore. Like I really love your implementation of kind of like folkloric themes. Like I think that's super cool, and that's the kind of spirituality that like I kind of vibe with as well. So yeah, lots of symbolism, I'm sorry, in your work, like snakes and cosmos and almost like totemical human anthropomorphic animal forms and all of that. Were you raised with any of that? Did you just kind of come into that on your own and become interested in it?
Oh no, I was raised Catholic. Yeah. So I was
okay.
I feel like I was raised like on the total opposite end of the spectrum of that type of like worldview. Like, I vividly remember like being in like Sunday school as a kid, and there was this one class where they were like, yeah, so like animals don't have souls, like animals don't go to heaven. And I was just like, this is bullshit. Like in that moment, I was like, this is bullshit. So I don't know. I feel like I very much came into that on my own. Like, when I was like a teenager, I got really interested in like studying different religions and like theology and stuff. But I think given my experience with like being raised in like a really repressive religious environment, I kind of felt like it was really cool to learn about all these different religions, but I don't feel that I could ever be a part of a religion, given just my personal like, issues that I've developed from that. But I definitely like, for me, I think I really resonate with like the ideas of like animism and like everything having a spirit to it and everything having a story to it, I guess. And that's also why I really love like different folk art traditions and just like studying mythology and kind of noticing all these common threads between things and being like there is this sort of like language of symbolism and archetype that is really universal, honestly. And I definitely try to like tap into that in my art and kind of like express my personal experience of those things, but also I do feel that it's something that other people connect with too. And I especially like through tattoo work have really realized that that like, you know, a lot of these, I don't know, just a lot of these sort of like animal, human, plant, like nature oriented like symbolism does connect with a lot of people. And like it's really cool through tattoo work to get to like create these images that are like expressing my feeling of that like magical world, and having other people like really like it enough to want to like put it on
Yes.
their skin is so cool.
Oh yeah, just the sacredness of being able to put something on someone's body permanently, I'm sure is magical. Inez, do you want to like just bring up maybe the tattoo tab just on our website just for an idea and share the screen while we talk about that a little? Yeah, did you get into, I'm assuming you got into tattooing after you got into more like two-dimensional forms probably, and kind of how did you come into that? And I don't know, I've been so interested recently because so many of these artists that we work with here at Streetwise and talk with, there's a cross section of like, they do muralism, they do tattoo, there's this cross section. And I've been really experimenting with thoughts in my head regarding that cross section in general, and like how the body is kind of a public canvas and it does come into this public art sense in a way. It just is kind of a private version. And how activism, you know, also a reclaiming of your body is basically this form of activism. And so it's really cool to watch all of that bleed together. Yeah, I'd love if you just shared a little bit about your tattooing journey, because that's super awesome. And I love your work.
For sure. So I've been tattooing now for 7 years. I very much stumbled into it. I was living with somebody who was like teaching herself how to tattoo, and she basically like peer pressured me into like giving her a stick and poke tattoo. And because I was just like totally not interested, you know, I had never been like, I want to be a tattoo artist.
Yeah.
But as soon as I started doing it, it just felt really right. And I was very fortunate to just have a lot of people who wanted to like let me give them tattoos. So I spent probably about a year and a half just tattooing people for free and just like learning and growing. And you know, it feels like, you know, now these many years into it, like I've had an interesting relationship with it where I have these like these phases where I kind of step away. And interestingly, it feels like the work feels like really overwhelming to me sometimes. Like I think just because of like the gravity of like working with other people's bodies, spending really long amounts of time like one-on-one, often with a stranger. And I find like when I'm working with people, we tend to just get into these like super deep conversations where it's like, okay, let's just like tell each other our whole life story.
What's your trauma? Like, tell me all of it.
Well,
It's
also,
like,
I feel like with your topics and like people getting tattooed by you, and like the art that you do is so personal, there must be a certain connection between you and the people that you're tattooing. So it's just like this like special connection from the beginning, even if you like didn't know them at first.
exactly. No, it totally feels that way. It's like, I don't know. I feel so lucky that I get the people coming to me who I do, because like, you know, I do think that obviously like my art is like this part of myself that I'm like showing to the world. And if people are connecting with that, like they are connecting with me. So it is like, I do find that I like make really amazing connections with people. It just also feels like really high stakes sometimes, you know, and especially like with COVID, and also like, you know, with you know, this summer with the uprisings that were going on, there was this whole conversation like emerging in the tattoo world about like racism in the tattoo industry. And there are like, the tattoo industry is just fucking awful in a certain way. Like there's these little enclaves of like amazing radical tattooers, but like there's such these pervasive issues of like racism and like misogyny and transphobia and all this stuff. And like, so that is another thing that I think as like a white person doing that work that I feel, especially now living in like New Orleans, that is a, you know, majority Black city, like that's another thing that I feel, you know, I have to spend a lot of time sitting with and kind of like processing how I want to hold myself relative to the work, because there is a lot of like power in doing it. And a lot of people have like abused that power, I guess. And so I feel like it's kind of, and going back to, the work that I had in the show, in the Streetwise show in 2019, like I had one of the projects I had was, I called it the Living Poem Project. And it was like, I had taken all these bits of writing I had from different parts of my life, kind of all around like these themes of like the queer experience. And I strung them together into a poem and then did like the poem in 8 parts on 8 different people as tattoos.
Oh, cool.
It was a really cool project that I would really like to repeat. But something that I'm thinking about a lot with that and thinking about repeating it is like, I don't feel it makes sense that it would just be like my words,
Yeah.
And so I'm like trying to imagine in the future doing a project like that where I could invite people to contribute their words
That
to
sounds
the poem.
great. I love that. I love the idea of collaboration within a tattoo realm. Like you don't really see that that often, I think, and to make it kind of an actual project. Do you happen to have images that you could pull up of any of those tattoos or that work? I just never came across that. And if you wanted to share your screen or had some images, I'd love to see.
1 second. I definitely do have it. Hold on. I gotta get my hard drive because it's on there. Yeah, it was let's see. Okay, hold on. I'm just gonna plug this in and I'll get it.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, it was a really cool project. I also like at the same time as like doing it, I also was like, and I'm gonna photograph all these tattoos on film with like crazy colored lights. And I had like
yes, you are. I love it.
like
film is not dead.
Go over the top about this, but I like had never really done a lot of like film inside with artificial lighting. So some of it is like not my like. I think going forward, I would maybe like revise the photo process a little bit because some of the photos did not turn out the greatest. Let's see.
That's the magic of film though, right? You don't know.
I know you're
surprise.
I know, exactly. It can be great and it can also be
totally.
It's a beauty of it though. I mean,
well, I love what you were saying earlier about in general when you were talking about animism and just that everything has a spirit, and that's something I totally believe too. Just the connectedness of all things, obviously a theme in your work. Does that kind of play into how you tattoo as well? Like the fact that your canvas, what you're putting the work on is animated, like it has spirit in a very, very blatant sense,
Totally. That does really influence my work. And I like, it's so different to create something like on somebody's skin than it is just on a paper, like in so many ways. Like the actual act of executing a tattoo is so, you're moving across like a curved surface and you're having to like, hit the right depth. And it's just so much more like, it's so much more physically involved. And I feel like that level of like presence and attention you have to have really does like translate into like this feeling of like connection and like, the fact that it just walks away and then it's out in the world and you might never see it again, but it has like a life of its own that's like so outside of me. I love it.
It's almost like this contradiction of like ephemerality, like for you, because the canvas leaves and it's gone, but it's very permanent elsewhere, and it, like you just said, it takes this life on of its own. That's
okay. I'm gonna share. I've never shared my screen, but I'm gonna try.
yeah, no, it's at the bottom.
Got it.
It's been a learning process.
It says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Ooh, let me see if I can fix that.
How long did you say you were tattooing again? I'm sorry, I know you said
7 years.
7 years, cool. And do you primarily work in all black ink is kind of what I was noticing on your website? Because it's cool that that's how you're doing that, and then lots of like color and then some of your other work too.
Yeah, I mostly work in black, but that is largely just because most people just want black. Recently I've done like some pieces that have been like full color, no black, which has been like a crazy departure from that. But I'm definitely interested in working on color, but I think it's kind of like a matter of demand a little bit. A lot of people don't want color tattoos, which I think is fair. I don't really have very many color tattoos, so.
Yeah, I'm the same. I feel like I'll only be black ink probably.
Yeah. I think it's hard with colors because like you get one color tattoo and then it's like you have to make sure all the colors like go together in a nice palette, you know.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna open a couple more of these so that, let's see.
Yeah, it's also not the end of the world if we can't get it to work.
Yeah.
Zoom is confusing.
It is.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how to like allow you to share your screen. I'm like,
That's okay. I could email, if y'all want, I could email you some of the files if you want.
yeah, if you could email me, I can actually do the screen sharing. That would be awesome.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. They're kind of like bigger files, so I'm just gonna throw a couple in there, but I'll just send them to. Yeah, this. I realized that like seeing that y'all have like looked at my website, I'm like, oh shit, I haven't updated my website.
Oh yeah. No worries. Actually, I was also just like random question curious. I really love the name Splendid Silent Sun. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Oh, totally. Hold on one second. I'm just gonna send this thing. Where did I put that? Okay. I'm just sending you a couple just to kind of give a little example of what the project looked like.
Amazing.
Okay. So the name Splendid Silent Sun is actually from a Walt Whitman poem. I was really obsessed with Walt Whitman when I was like a teenager. And there's like, I forget what poem it is, but it's like, I don't know, I guess something I really liked about his work. I know that he's like somewhat of a problematic fave now or whatever. But I just liked so much how like so much of his work is just like praising life and just like celebrating like being alive. And the line is like, give me the splendid silent sun with all its beams full dazzling or something like that. And it's just like, I forget what the rest of the poem is, but it's just like this celebratory vibe. So and that was like the handle I made on Instagram when I was like 17.
Well, I love it. It's stuck.
Yeah, it did say full because then like, you know, I feel like if people like follow, if you have like a certain number of people following you online, they're like, oh, you're this, they just like call you your Instagram name. And you're like,
totally.
okay.
Yeah.
I am that. I've considered changing it, but I like it.
I love it. I love the background behind it. I'm getting more into poetry recently, so I'm gonna have to write some stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Here we go, guys. This is
cool.
I'm not sure if you're like seeing my full computer or you're seeing like.
No, we're seeing the images. It's perfect. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So these are just a couple, you know, I was really playing around with like integrating text and imagery that kind of told the story of the text. And then there were like 8 pieces that strung together into this poem.
Oh, that is so cool. And so these are people, how did you kind of source these people? Are they people you know? Do they know each other? And now that they have this tattoo that is spread amongst them?
A couple of them have met each other, which is cool. A couple of them I think met each other at the show. But I just put out a call on the internet and was like, hey, I'm interested in doing this project. It's kind of like totally an experiment. And, you know, I'll do the tattoo for free, but you just have to kind of like be down to let me do whatever. And I put out like a list. I had more than 8. I probably had like 15 different lines. And I just kind of was like, just send me, you know, a thing about like why you connect with this line, why you want this certain line. And then sadly, I got like so much more interest than I was able to accommodate because I like did the whole project in like 1 month's time. It was kind of like really quick and crazy. So yeah, then I just basically, you know, kind of chose it based off of what people wrote about why the line connected with them, and also based on like how the lines fit together.
I love that so much. Like truly, that's very inspiring. I hope you do something similar again in the future because
I really want to. I really want to. I think, yeah, I'm just trying to like, brainstorm how to kind of like, you know, recreate the project, but also restructure it again in a way that it's not just like my voice. Cause I know I'm really interested in trying to like, I don't know, I'm interested in like art forms that like give voice to multiple people, you know? And obviously like a lot of what I make is like expressing my own experience, but I think especially with something like this that's like on people's bodies, I think would be really powerful to like you know, figure out a way to like allow it to be like their words on their body, you know.
Yeah, make it more kind of a shared experience type thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
And
kind
I
of
will say
going,
that looking at these, I love how you used film. I'm just gonna go ahead and tell you that, like, the colors are just great.
yeah, they are. They really
Thank
are.
you. I got these like little, they're like these plastic kind of like, I don't know what they're called. They're these like tinted plastic things that go in like stage lights. They like slide in and they make it different colors, but I was like taping them on my lamps and stuff.
I love that.
Like the two-tone colors. It was really fun.
Very cool, very cool. Well, let's also talk, since we're talking about like just specific projects. I'd love to touch on the Chapel of the Femme, or the Femme Chapel, because that's super cool, and that was, you know, through Streetwise. I really like this idea of creating physical space that you can interact with and walk into. It's also obviously a metaphor for the space you're creating spiritually or just artistically or whatever. But interactive art is so cool, and I mean that's, you know, street art, public art, it's all interactive in a sense, even just out on the streets, because you don't know what that, you know, person is how they're gonna react to it. But to create a space where you can actually walk into is really inspiring. And we'll have Inez pull up
Yeah,
a couple of images of that. Yeah, but if you want to talk about that project, we'd love to hear.
Totally. That project was very definitely like kind of a first for me. I had never really built an installation before. And I really like basically in creating the piece, like the original inspiration for it, kind of like going back to my like Catholic upbringing, was like the Stations of the Cross in like a Catholic church. Like, I don't know if either of y'all have been in a Catholic church, but like, you know, they have on the sides of the church like the Stations of the Cross of Jesus being crucified, and the idea supposedly is that people can walk the whole Stations of the Cross kind of as like a meditation on like the suffering of Jesus, basically. And I was like, you know, as much as I'm like, you know, I have my resistance to Catholicism and stuff, I really like, I'm interested in like just the aesthetic of like temples and churches and like sacred spaces. And I was interested in kind of like creating that for myself, just, and like this piece is incredibly personal. It basically, all the imagery in it has to do with like personal experiences around being queer and trans, and also like the piece at the end, kind of like the rose window, it all contains portraits of like people in my like very close family that I grew up with who are queer and trans. I'm really lucky that I have like multiple queer people in my family as well, and I just wanted to like make a space of like just celebrating and honoring them. And I was interested, yeah, in like, you know, telling these stories, but creating like this intimate environment in which people like view the story, because I feel like I struggle so much with just like the general like the art world. I struggle with it. I don't feel like it's, you know, it doesn't sometimes to me feel like the most authentic type of space in which to like view certain content, I guess. And so this piece was definitely an attempt to just like create something that felt like a more appropriate space for these stories to be told, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, certain niches of the art world are so authentic and so beautiful and like powerful. And like, I mean, that's a great segue into like talking about just like that cross section of activism and art, and just how to really raise up underrepresented narratives or create a space, physical or metaphorical or however, to really share these stories. Because I mean, I don't know, I find human creativity and the ability to make things to just be one of the most fantastic, just in a base level sense. It makes us, it's kind of, you know, it kind of, what's the word, separates us from other species, and that we can use our brains in this way and process. And yeah, I agree with you in that the art world, there's a lot of misogyny, a lot of racism, a lot of sexism, a lot of just, it's, you know, in that industry. But to be able to carve out these niches and seeing people do the really powerful work, which, you know, you're part of that, is really inspiring and really great.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I grew up like in the DIY scene in Denver, cool. And like I feel like I've always gravitated more towards like DIY type spaces, just because of like the feeling of like community and like the feeling of like it not being super capitalistic, I guess. And like that's kind of been what I've like struggled with the art world. But I actually like I've been having this process like internally where I'm like, I really like, yeah, I do kind of want to see if I can like show my work in these more like art world-y context. Like even being in the show and Streetwise, I'm like, that I really haven't shown my work much besides that. Like the majority of how my work gets out in the world is like through tattooing and through like, you know, murals and street art and stuff. Like I haven't really like shown my work in a gallery very much, but I have all this work that I've made that I could show in the gallery. I just have this like aversion, and also like I think part of it is just feeling like this kind of like imposter syndrome, you know what I mean? And feeling like, so much of what is like really praised in the art world feels like it's like very conceptual type art, and there's a lot of concept behind my work, but like I feel like my work doesn't really neatly fit into that. Like it feels like I feel much more aligned with like folk art and like outsider art and like street art than I do like conceptual postmodern art.
Oh, I
So
totally agree. Yeah, outsider art is so interesting. Just this like the things people can teach themselves and come and do in their own right without a fancy degree or something. It's all obviously valid, but to watch people just kind of carve out a niche on their own is super, super inspiring.
Totally. And like I think there can be like a really there can definitely be like a purity of vision to people who are like self-taught in certain things, I feel like, because getting an education in any art form, it's like you kind of are pushed into like the channel of how people like already have done that before you. So it's really cool to see work by, and I don't even, I went to an art high school, so I don't even, I definitely have like an art education, and so I'm not like totally self-taught, but in my entire adult life, like I haven't gone to art school or anything like that. So, and I found that my work has like grown in really cool ways, like absent that context.
Yeah, if you don't have those like hard boundaries, or like someone teaching you something very structured, it's really crazy what your brain and your heart can do and take you. Totally. And like, yeah, just know, boundaries are good, but not with art sometimes.
Also, something based on that, and like not having gone to art school and certain things, what do you think, like, are there any specific artists that really influenced your art creation and the pieces of art that you make? Like, are there specific artists that you informed your process through and that really made you grow as an artist?
That's a really great question. There's many artists who I felt like influenced by. Honestly, like the main things I would say that influence my work currently, I would say that for me, it was a very like monumental thing to learn about like the political printmaker, like the political Mexican printmakers of like the early 1900s. Like that for me, I was like, oh my God, like the fact that these people were like Posada is like the most famous one, but there were many. And the fact that these people are making these like political images and like distributing them on the street to people was super influential to me. So definitely that whole tradition has really influenced me. I also feel very, very inspired by graphic novels, like, and just the way in which like people, do visual storytelling, I guess, through that medium. And so, one person whose art I'm like obsessed with is Mobius, who is like a French.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And also like recently, this is like kind of a more recent development, but I've been becoming just like really, really like obsessed with like fantasy and sci-fi art recently. And like just in general, like ideologically, science fiction to me is like so important. Like Ursula K. Le Guin and like Octavia Butler and these like Femme sci-fi writers. I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like for me, like science fiction is such like an important process of really like committing to like imagining the future and like how it could look, both the good and the bad, and like that. So like that kind of connects in with like, the art of Mobius and other like graphic artists who are like envisioning this like futurescape, I guess. And so like right now I'm feeling really inspired by that, and really inspired by like people who are just committing to truly like illustrating something of the future. Yeah, I don't know. I like there's a lot. It's hard to even, it's hard to even like name because I feel like I have so many influences going on in my head. I also am very interested in like more I wouldn't say like ancient, but like older folk art stuff like illuminated manuscripts. And like I recently went to the International Museum of Folk Art in Santa Fe, which is like seriously like the coolest museum I've ever been to. It's like
Oh,
this amazing like collection of like all these like folk art objects, like statues and paintings and stuff. And like it's all like arranged into these crazy scenes of all these little like statues interacting with each other. And like there's this one where like there's like this like two panel like kind of like diorama or something, and there's like a heaven with all these little like angels, and then there's like this dark little hell pit with all these like
oh my gosh.
stuff.
Sounds like a Garden of Earthly Delights by Bosch.
Exactly. I
It gets
love
weird, right?
so yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I draw inspiration from a lot of places, and I definitely in like, you know, it's like there's nothing real, that people are like, there's nothing original that can be made anymore. It's all like influenced by something else. But I feel really interested in kind of like bringing together these things that really do inspire me and trying to kind of create something that feels, kind of both like magical and political, I guess. And
Absolutely. And I totally feel like the comment of nothing being original, it has its points of certainty. And as an artist myself, I've heard it very often, but I think there's a magic in communicating and taking inspiration from something that's been done in the past and transforming it into yourself and putting your own voice into it and your own experience into it. But just you're also showing some sort of admiration and respect to those things that drove you to want to be an artist. Because I mean, as an artist, like many times you started off by appreciating other art before making it yourself, and it really does inform your process. So I think it's very much like the originality comes from what you make of like the images that you've already seen.
totally. And like that, I don't know, I feel like it's kind of such an individualistic thing to be like, I need to make this like totally unique thing that no one has ever done before. When really it's like, I feel like it's all of us creating things kind of in concert with each other that like shapes culture. And I feel like it's important to just focus on like playing your part in that and having like a bigger vision of what it's a part of, and not needing to be like necessarily like the shining star of that vision, but just like a part of something, I guess. It's kind of how I think about it.
Oh, well, I wish that that was just how society was in general, right? I feel like if we all just
Yeah,
acknowledge that we are small parts of something a lot bigger and something a lot more meaningful, and it wasn't like I want to be in charge or I want the authority or I want to be the best, like humans being humans, right? Like,
yeah, totally.
um, so I love that you bring up like Moebius, I always say his name wrong, because I love that like fantastical. Here, maybe I'll share my screen and bring up just some images to people who don't know. I mean, so fantastical. I can see how you draw that inspiration. Oh, I can't share the screen. I forgot. Do you want to Google it? It's Moebius. But yeah, the bright colors, almost that marrying of like ancient and future. You're like looking at these cool like excavations and weird temples, and you're like, is this supposed to be some crazy like future, utopia, dystopia, or is it ancient? And I love that marrying of the old and then the contemporary. And I feel like you play with that a lot, just, obviously using very folkloric motifs and symbols, but you're bringing in, queerness and the divine masculine, the divine feminine, like all these things and marrying them. So very cool stuff. So fantastical.
Yeah, I love his work so much.
The use of detail and just like the graphic novel aspect of it, along with like the creativity in it. I can totally see how that inspires your work as well from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Did you get like, just tell us a little bit about how you decided to start maybe doing comics? Were you just really interested in graphic novels and in this kind of realm of design, and then decided you wanted to jump into that?
Yeah, I mean, it really came from just like, reading a lot of them and just being so like inspired by that form of storytelling, and how like, I mean, I guess in general with my work, something I really focus on is like, how is this image like telling a story that people can actually like perceive, and not to, overly lead the viewer, but just, to create something that's like legible, I guess, because I feel like a lot of art is not, and art doesn't have to be legible in that way, but I'm interested in like making work that does lead someone into a story or give them something with which to build a story in their head. And so I guess just like reading various graphic novels and just like, seeing like the type of stories that can be told as well. Like there's this graphic novel called Day Tripper that I really, really, really love. It's like,
I feel like I've heard that. That's familiar. Inez, do you want to bring up some of her she has a couple comics. They have a couple comics on their website that I'd love to muse through. Yeah. So Day Tripper, is that what you said?
Yeah, it's just like this very like, I don't know, it is kind of this guy's life story, but basically in the story, his job is to write obituaries, and it's the whole story of his life, but then each chapter of his life ends with him dying and an obituary of what his life would have meant if he died at that point in his life. And I just loved like how existential it was, and it really inspired me just towards like what kind of stories can be told, because I like when I was growing up, I was not that into comics, like because all I knew of comics was like Marvel and DC comics.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just like don't care about superheroes that much personally. But like, so it's been for me like, and I do enjoy to write as well, so it has been like cool to have that outlet of like writing and then also like creating images that correspond. Forward Motion was like the first big comic that I made, and I actually made it with my younger sibling in collaboration. And so they had written the story actually before, and like the story was basically they had a friend commit suicide when they were pretty young, like 15 or something. And so the whole story is kind of about like processing grief. And even though it wasn't like my story, I definitely like related it to kind of like this feeling of being like kind of lost in emotion and like madness, and kind of trying to like illustrate this process of someone going on a journey like through madness basically and grief. And so that was a really cool thing to work with someone else's words and kind of like, obviously the meaning of their original words is there, but then sort of reshaping the narrative as well in my own way based on like my imagery. So
yeah, I love it. I love that integration. I also just love graphic novels are something I've read in like classes and stuff before, but never fully jumped into. But I'm gonna have to write down Day Tripper because that sounded really interesting. But I just love the ability, like, it's kind of turning the idea of what is a comic on its head, right? Like comics are usually just like silly, maybe kind of dumb. Like sometimes there's social commentary, sometimes, but it's often just lighthearted, whatever. So to be able to take the really meaningful work and the deep stuff, and it's not always sunshine and rainbows, even though you're playing with this particular kind of style of graphic design, I feel like is super cool.
Totally. And like this comic that we're looking at right now, the Jaguar, is like based on a dream that I had, and I definitely, with the comics I work on, take a lot of inspiration from things that happen in my dreams, because like oftentimes, like at least for me, like kind of the narrative quality of my dreams like is just like very vividly like significant in this way. Like, and dreams are such a like strange realm, and it's cool to like pull stories out of there and be like, this kind of feels like it connects to some stuff, but it also is like this story kind of came out of my subconscious and it like doesn't fully make sense. And I enjoy kind of like that
totally,
sort of
like piecing together kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Do you ever, just out of curiosity, are you the type who can like lucid dream? Do you ever?
I've had one lucid dream in my life. When I was a teenager, I was like obsessed with trying to lucid dream.
No, I currently am, so I feel you.
Yeah, and I would like record all my dreams, and actually what I started doing that really didn't help me lucid dream, because I've only done it once, but it had helped me remember my dreams, is instead of like writing them down, I would like take out my phone and just like record myself talking about it, because I find like it's easier for me to like tell a story verbally than, because I feel like if you're writing it down, you feel like you need to put it in this like linear format. But telling it verbally, it can be a little bit more circular, and that kind of more reflects how dreams are to me. And so it's crazy because going back to like 2012 or 2013, I have some of these like dream recordings that I had when I was like, 18 years old. I'm like, oh my God, this is
Oh,
so
I love that though.
listen back to this.
Oh, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love how you play with the themes of just dreams in general. Like there was a tapestry, I think maybe in your store or something that I was looking at.
Oh yeah.
That says, "When the dream comes, let it eat you." And I literally like wrote that down. I was like, yes, like I love that. I mean,
Yeah.
what does that like mean to you? I mean, I assume just letting yourself fully just.
I mean, I think that like in that context, what the dream means, like it could mean like a literal dream, or it could just mean like some force from like the depths, I guess. And like in that piece, like there's like the kind of giant, like there's the little person in this little like ruin in the middle, kind of like sleeping, and then there's this like giant snake coming around and it's like drooling and it's like
Yeah.
totally about to eat them or something. But I feel like for me, snakes very much like are this symbol of the subconscious and of like this like kind of ancient part of ourselves. And I feel like, I guess, in that line, in that piece, what I was thinking about is just, I guess, like the idea of like surrendering to these like deeper parts of the self, and like, being willing to let those things in a little bit, and not like overly like, I don't know. I feel like, they say that we don't use like 90% of our brain or whatever. But I don't think that's true. I think like we clearly have as much brain as we do for like a reason, and it's doing something. And I feel like when you're dreaming, you're like getting to see more of what your brain is doing. And I feel like there's this like definitely like this like transpersonal element of like how our brains work, and they're kind of connecting into this like collective unconscious. And I think that we, especially given the society we live in, but also it's probably an evolutionary adaptation to like suppress that a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm just interested in dreams because it's this sort of more unfiltered way of touching into those other parts of ourselves, I guess.
Yeah, I'm all about exploring the subconscious. Like there's a lot going on in there. That's for
There
sure.
is.
And not everyone taps in, and like even people who think they do don't always, So
And it's so
Yeah.
interesting, so many of our instincts that we're born with and carry on with us as humans come from this collective subconscious, and like experiences that were in a past life, or like the commodities that we have right now were in there, and like certain dangers that we feel just based on like that historical collective subconscious. I'm so interested in that too, and like how that communicates and connects us all as one in many ways.
Yeah, it makes it like really, I think, hard to sort out like what is you and what is not you. And I think like to me that is like what makes me so interested in like just trying to understand like what like the nature of being human is. And like to me goes just so far beyond just like our individual experience as like a person, and like connects into like, you know both these kind of like, these social struggles that we're like having as a species, and like I don't know. I think about that a lot. I'm like, God, we are so like violent and horrible to each other. And I'm like, does it have to be that way? You know what I mean? Like, is that something that's innate in us, or like, what is that? And also, beyond just kind of our social realm, like also these more kind of like spiritual things about just being like little intelligent living beings on this tiny planet in this like vast fucking universe. Like, I don't know. It's fucking crazy. Like,
no, it truly is. I get so existential like that, where I'm like, I ponder like the juxtaposition of like the beauty of humans, like the ability to like love, to create, to communicate, to be
Yeah.
vulnerable. Like there's so much like almost heart-wrenching beauty. And then I'm like, wow, humans completely suck. We're terrible, we're violent, we're so like selfish and capitalistic, and there's all these things, and it's just such this thing. And then I'm like, we're on a rock boomeranging through immeasurable cosmic soup, just like flying like so fast. And like it's the smallness and the bigness of it all. And I'm like, it hurts my head, it keeps me up at night. I'm like,
Yeah.
so thank goodness people are making art about it and stuff.
Totally. Yeah, I've been getting like so recently, I've been getting so like obsessed with space stuff and like learning more about space and like quantum physics and stuff like that, because it's like it's really interesting, like going back to kind of like the interest in religion and stuff. I'm like, when you really get down to certain things with like quantum physics, it is like extremely mystical. And you're just like, what the fuck is going on? And it's like cool to like learn about this science that actually feels like, for me, it like really squares with like my personal like sense of like my beliefs about reality, and like being like, none of this is really explainable. It's like extremely chaotic, and like our ability to like understand our reality is like super limited. But it's cool to kind of like, I don't know, just like learn more about that stuff. And it definitely like has been informing my work a lot recently. And yeah, I don't know, I also like, just going back to sci-fi, sorry, I'm just talking about
No, don't, sorry.
all the stuff that I'm interested in right now. But I just watched this show that I really liked, that's called The Expanse. And it's like this science fiction, like speculative science fiction show that's set like 300 years in the future. And it's basically like, in this show, like humans have like colonized space. And it was just like so cool to watch like a space show that's like set in our solar system and our reality, just like in the future. And like, I don't know, just like it made me start thinking about like, wow, like what if humans do make it to space? It seems like we're kind of on the way to it. And like, are we going to see that in our lifetimes? And like, what does that mean for us? You know,
Yeah.
like we're so, you know, our entire reality is like on this planet right now. But like, what if we're able to really create environments where we can live in space? Like, when right now we're so limited by the confines of our Earth, is that going to make us like abandon our Earth even further? Is that going to like help us really recognize what we have here? I don't know.
No, I love that. I love that train of thought. I totally agree. Because there's like so many cool and interesting and like positive, I guess, facets of that idea of like going out there into space and stuff. But then you're also just like colonizing other planets. Like we just messed up our own. Like that's our fault kind of thing. But like
Yeah.
humans are brains and we're so smart and we're scary smart, right? And also kind of stupid, but like scary smart. And like to watch how much even just historically humans have like jumped the leaps and the bounds in terms of
Mhm.
technology. And that's why, going back to the sci-fi thing, it is so interesting to play with those ideas that already exist and then like shoot them even farther into the future, even if it's only 30 or 50 years or, you know, not even an entire lifetime. Things can change so much and we have no idea what that's going to look like. So
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to be like willing to just try to like dream the future that we want to have, you know, because I find myself even, you know, with like the pandemic being just like so fatalistic and being like, it's never gonna end, it's always gonna be this way, you know. And like, I think that happens with many things, with like capitalism too, for instance. It's like, feels like it's just like this overarching thing that we're always gonna have to live with. And it's like, not necessarily, it hasn't always existed. There's a lot of things that make it like not sustainable to keep existing. Like, what would it look like beyond that? And that has been like a really inspiring thing about this whole like pandemic time, amidst all the suffering, is like seeing people really like actualizing certain things, you know, and being like, we can create these certain things right now, actually. And I think that, like, you know, as smart as humans are, I think we sometimes like suffer from like a failure of imagination, you know. And also, that's just kind of how capitalism works, is it like beats you down and you don't feel like you can do anything except just like work and survive. And like,
So a seek for comfort in many ways. Like what we know is what we know, and there's a fear of uncertainty and like going beyond what we know because we don't know how the outcome's going to turn out. And many humans were like centered to stick in that comfort zone. And I think some of the beauty of sci-fi, like what you mentioned, is like getting a view or an image of that uncertainty and like those possibilities that haven't been explored, and someone exploring them and giving you like a little glimpse into it, and like being able to like fly that imagination and seeing like plausible ways of like facing these issues.
totally, totally. Yeah, it's like, it's cool to, you know, I think that like, I think about like the science fiction that I read when I was like in middle school, which was like George Orwell and like,
oh
you
yeah.
know, do androids dream of electric sheep and stuff like that, which is kind of like this more like horrifying view, I feel like, of the future. But I've been really inspired to see things that are like, you know, also more like imagining that things could get better, I guess, and not just like infinitely like continue on this trajectory that they're on, you know.
Mhm.
But I guess we'll see. I just really appreciate honestly everybody who's kind of like putting their efforts towards like visualizing that stuff, because like we need it, honestly. Like we need to have some sense of like perspective and something to like move towards, you know?
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we should probably, I love this conversation very much. We should probably wrap it up for time's sake. Kind of jumping off what you just said in terms of envisioning that future and, you know, creating it. What is next for you artistically? Like, do you have any cool projects on the forefront, or even just, you know, once things go back to whatever normal will be, or any ideas like that?
Well, honestly, a lot of like this year has been really different in so many ways. Just like with my tattoo work, I've been like extremely limited in being able to do that. I have been painting a lot, and I actually started this year using watercolors, which was like so crazy because like I always hated them so much. But like at some point this year, I got one of those like dinky little watercolor palettes, and I just like went crazy with it. And so I am working on a lot of paintings. I am also like kind of working on some more like installation concept stuff. And I am getting back to tattooing later this month. And so I'm, you know, just kind of like trying to take this time to just sort of be in my own little like hermitage a little bit with my work, and just kind of be like really focusing on working on things. And I'm gonna, as I mentioned earlier, I'm one of my goals for myself is to try to show some work in an actual art gallery.
Yeah.
So I'm working towards that. And also you know, something that's amazing about living in New Orleans is like there are so many huge like abandoned warehouses and buildings here, and like the street art is so beautiful here. And so just one of my goals going forward is to just like go out and paint in more like abandoned places, and just like, you know, I love doing stuff like that because it just like requires literally no permission at all. And I think that it's, you know, that feels really important to continue to like invest in those art forms that don't require any filter and are just like pure expression and kind of like a more like democratic public space. And so I'm just gonna continue doing that. And honestly, like I feel like I'm just kind of like rolling with the punches of this world right now. and
Yeah, everyone is.
yeah, so you know, just kind of hanging in there and trying to like just keep working and not get too depressed. It's the goal.
Those are valid efforts. Cool. I'm excited to see what you do, and I hopefully you do get out there and make some more like, you know, public art and stuff in abandoned spaces. I feel like that's so cool in terms of bringing down, like how we were saying, the art industry can be kind of meh sometimes. So bringing down those barriers, and that's what public art does. Like any random person, a kid, an elderly, anyone can just roll up on this cool piece and like react to it and see it. And it's just like completely lowering those barriers. And I think that's really important. So
Yeah, totally.
yeah. Inez, if you have any other questions before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I feel like I could stay talking to you guys all day.
I know. I'm like, can we just
I
talk
could.
about it?
I would love to. It's amazing, but it was just lovely to get to meet you and talk to you and know a little more about you. And I'm definitely psyched to like keep track of your art and like keep an eye on what you make next, because you are truly inspiring me. Like,
yeah, you really are. I'm trying to get tattooed by you, so I'll come to
yeah.
Y'all are both in Colorado?
Yeah, we're both in Colorado. Yeah.
Okay. I'm planning to hopefully come back there this summer.
Cool.
Okay.
Cool.
So,
well, we're all following you on social media now, so we'll be seeing.
Well, so nice talking with both of you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your time, really.
Of course. Yeah, y'all have a beautiful week.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, pause.